On a warm Sunday afternoon, the quiet suburban neighborhood of Maplewood was bathed in golden sunlight. Birds chirped lazily from the trees, and children played on the sidewalks as their parents chatted over fences. It was the kind of place where everyone knew each other's names, where life moved at a slower pace, and where people felt safe. But for James Thompson, a retired Army major who had dedicated over 2 decades of his life to serving his country, this sense of peace would soon be shattered. James was a tall, broad-shouldered man with salt-and-pepper hair and a calm demeanor that made him instantly likable. After retiring from the military, he and his wife, Lisa, had moved to Maplewood seeking a simpler life. They wanted a community where they could raise their kids in safety and enjoy the little things: family, dinners, weekend barbecues, and evening walks with their loyal German Shepherd, Max. James loved taking these walks. It gave him time to think, to breathe, and to reconnect with the world after years spent in war zones and high-stress environments. That particular afternoon, James decided to take Max for a stroll through the park. He wore a plain white t-shirt, jeans, and sneakers, nothing out of the ordinary. As he walked, he nodded politely at neighbors passing by. Some greeted him warmly, others waved from their porches. James had become a well-respected figure in the community, admired not only for his service but also for his kindness and humility. People often stopped him to thank him for his sacrifices, or simply to share a friendly conversation. But as James rounded the corner near Maplewood Park, something unusual caught his eye. A police car was parked haphazardly across the street, its engine idling. The officer inside, Daniel Carter, was known around town for his abrasive attitude and heavy-handed approach. Many residents whispered about his behavior, especially when it came to interactions with people of color. Though James had heard these stories, he never imagined they would have anything to do with him. After all, he was just an ordinary citizen, enjoying a peaceful walk. Officer Carter stepped out of his vehicle suddenly, his hand already gripping the handle of his gun. His sharp voice cut through the tranquility of the afternoon. "Stop right there, don't move," he barked, pointing the weapon directly at James. Startled, James froze mid-step, instinctively raising his hands while trying to keep Max under control. "What's going on?" James asked calmly, though his heart began pounding in his chest. "You fit the description," Officer Carter snapped, his tone accusatory. "There have been reports of burglaries in the area. You're tall, black, and wearing a hoodie." James blinked in confusion. "I'm not wearing a hoodie," he replied evenly, gesturing to his plain t-shirt. "I'm just walking my dog." Despite his calmness, the situation felt surreal. How could someone mistake him for a burglar? He wasn't carrying anything suspicious, nor was he behaving in a way that warranted such aggression. Yet Officer Carter didn't lower his weapon. Instead, he continued shouting orders, demanding that James stay put and explain himself. Passers-by began to notice the commotion. Some stopped in shock, unsure of what was happening. Others pulled out their phones to record the scene. Within minutes, a small crowd gathered, murmuring among themselves. Someone called out, "Is everything okay here?" Another person shouted, "Why do you have your gun drawn?" The tension in the air grew thicker with every passing second. James remained composed, knowing that arguing or showing any sign of defiance could escalate the situation further. He repeated himself slowly and clearly. "Officer, I am a resident of this neighborhood. I live 3 blocks away. I'm just walking my dog." But Officer Carter seemed unmoved. His face hardened and he refused to acknowledge the growing audience. Instead, he radioed for backup, claiming that James was acting suspiciously and refusing to comply with instructions. As the minutes dragged on, James couldn't help but feel a mix of emotions: anger, frustration, and disbelief. Here he was, a decorated veteran who had risked his life for his country, being treated like a criminal in broad daylight. Memories of his time in the military flooded back: the discipline, the leadership, the countless lives he had saved. Yet none of that mattered now. All Officer Carter saw was the color of his skin. Meanwhile, the crowd grew louder. Neighbors, who recognized James, stepped forward, vouching for him. One woman exclaimed, "This is ridiculous. We know James. He's one of us." Another man added, "You're harassing an innocent man." Their voices echoed through the street, drawing even more attention. Someone uploaded the video to social media, and within hours the hashtag #JusticeForJames began trending locally. Lisa, James's wife, received a frantic call from a neighbor informing her about the incident. She rushed to the scene, her mind racing with worry. When she arrived, she found her husband standing with his hands raised, surrounded by onlookers and a visibly agitated Officer Carter. Her blood boiled at the sight. "What is going on here?" she demanded, approaching cautiously. "Why are you pointing a gun at my husband?" Officer Carter ignored her, maintaining his stance. By now, additional police units had arrived, creating an intimidating presence. But instead of diffusing the situation, their arrival only heightened tensions. Protesters began chanting slogans, calling for accountability and justice. The once peaceful neighborhood had turned into a battleground of emotions. Back at home later that evening, James sat quietly on the couch, staring blankly at the wall. Max lay at his feet, sensing his owner's distress. Lisa placed a comforting hand on his shoulder. "Are you okay?" she asked softly. James sighed deeply, shaking his head. "No," he admitted. "I'm not okay. This shouldn't have happened." "Not here. Not to me." The next day, news outlets picked up the story, amplifying the outrage. Headlines blared phrases like, "Racist cop targets retired Army major," and "Community demands answers after shocking incident." Social media exploded with support for James, with thousands sharing posts and calling for Officer Carter's dismissal. Local politicians weighed in, condemning the officer's actions and promising investigations into systemic issues within the police force. For James, the whirlwind of attention was overwhelming. While he appreciated the solidarity, he couldn't shake off the lingering feelings of betrayal and disillusionment. He had fought for freedom and equality abroad, yet here in his own backyard, he faced discrimination and hostility. Determined to seek justice, he contacted a civil rights attorney recommended by a friend. Together, they prepared to file a lawsuit against Officer Carter and the police department, vowing to hold them accountable for their actions. Little did James know this incident would spark a movement far greater than he ever anticipated. What started as a single act of injustice would soon ignite conversations about race, power, and reform across the nation. And though the road ahead promised challenges, James resolved to stand firm, not just for himself, but for everyone who deserved to live without fear of prejudice. As the days following the incident unfolded, James Thompson found himself thrust into a spotlight he had never sought. The video footage of Officer Daniel Carter pointing a gun at him spread like wildfire across social media platforms, drawing millions of views and sparking heated debates. News outlets clamored for interviews, activists reached out to offer support, and local leaders called for immediate action. While some praised James's composure during the ordeal, others criticized the systemic racism that allowed such incidents to occur in the first place. For James, however, the whirlwind of attention brought both validation and exhaustion. At home, life became anything but normal. Reporters camped outside their house, hoping to catch a glimpse of James or Lisa. Phone calls poured in from strangers, expressing sympathy, while others shared their own stories of mistreatment by law enforcement. Each call weighed heavily on James, reminding him of how pervasive these issues were. He felt a deep sense of responsibility, not just to fight for his own justice, but to amplify the voices of those who couldn't speak up. Yet, the emotional toll was undeniable. Sleep eluded him as memories of the confrontation replayed in his mind. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the glint of the gun barrel pointed at him and heard Officer Carter's accusatory tone. Lisa noticed her husband's growing anxiety and did everything she could to support him. She encouraged him to take breaks from watching the news and reading online comments, knowing how toxic they could be. "You've already done so much," she told him one evening over dinner. "Don't let this consume you." But James struggled to detach himself. How could he ignore the fact that people were rallying behind him, demanding change? How could he turn away when others looked to him as a symbol of hope? Meanwhile, the community of Maplewood rallied together in unprecedented ways. Neighbors organized protests outside the police station, holding signs that read, "Protect our heroes" and "No justice, no peace." Parents brought their children, teaching them about standing up against injustice. Local businesses showed solidarity by displaying posters in their windows supporting James and calling for accountability. Even the high school held an assembly where students discussed racial bias and police reform, inspired by James's story. The momentum grew beyond Maplewood, reaching neighboring towns and cities. Social media played a crucial role in amplifying the movement. Hashtags like "Stand with James" and "End Racial Profiling" trended nationwide, drawing attention from influential figures, including politicians, celebrities, and civil rights activists. A GoFundMe campaign launched to cover James's legal expenses quickly surpassed its goal, raising hundreds of thousands of dollars within days. Donors left heartfelt messages alongside their contributions, thanking James for his bravery and vowing to stand with him every step of the way. Amidst all this, Officer Carter faced mounting scrutiny. Once confident in his authority, he now found himself isolated and under intense investigation. His superiors suspended him without pay, pending the outcome of internal reviews and potential criminal charges. Bodycam footage from the day of the incident revealed glaring inconsistencies in his report. He claimed James had been acting aggressively and refused to comply with orders, yet the video clearly showed James remaining calm and cooperative throughout the encounter. Worse still, there was no evidence to support Carter's claim that James matched the description of a burglary suspect. The vague description, a tall black man wearing a hoodie, didn't even align with what James was actually wearing. Public outrage reached new heights as more details emerged. Residents demanded answers, not only about Carter's actions, but also about the broader culture of policing in their town. Town hall meetings drew record crowds, with citizens questioning why someone like Carter had been allowed to remain on the force despite previous complaints about his conduct. Some shared harrowing stories of their own encounters with him, painting a picture of a pattern of abuse and discrimination. Others called for sweeping reforms, including mandatory anti-bias training, stricter oversight, and greater transparency in police operations. For Carter, the consequences extended far beyond his career. Friends and colleagues distanced themselves, unwilling to associate with someone embroiled in such controversy. His family life unraveled as well. His wife, Sarah, struggled to reconcile the man she married with the image portrayed in the media. Arguments became frequent, culminating in her filing for divorce. Their two young children, confused and frightened by the sudden upheaval, began acting out at school. Carter moved out of their home, retreating into solitude as his world crumbled around him. Legal proceedings loomed large for both men. James and his attorney filed a lawsuit against Carter and the police department, alleging excessive use of force, racial profiling, and emotional distress. They sought punitive damages not only for James but also to send a message that such behavior would no longer be tolerated. Meanwhile, prosecutors reviewed the case against Carter, weighing whether to press criminal charges. The decision rested heavily on the body cam footage and witness testimonies, which overwhelmingly supported James's account of events. As preparations for the trial intensified, James continued to grapple with mixed emotions. On one hand, he felt empowered by the outpouring of support and the progress being made toward justice. On the other hand, he couldn't shake the lingering anger and frustration. It wasn't just about what happened to him. It was about the countless others who had endured similar experiences without receiving the same level of attention. He often thought about the families of victims whose names didn't make headlines, whose stories went untold. This realization fueled his determination to keep pushing forward. To channel his energy constructively, James partnered with advocacy groups working to combat systemic racism in law enforcement. He attended rallies, spoke at conferences, and met with lawmakers to discuss policy changes. One of his primary goals was to implement comprehensive training programs designed to address implicit biases among officers. He believed that education and empathy could go a long way in preventing future tragedies. At the same time, he advocated for increased accountability measures, such as independent oversight boards and transparent reporting systems. Despite the challenges, moments of hope kept James going. Letters arrived daily from people inspired by his courage, teachers incorporating his story into classroom discussions, veterans sharing words of encouragement, and young activists crediting him with igniting their passion for social justice. These connections reminded him that his struggle wasn't in vain. Slowly but surely, he began to see glimpses of change taking root. Back in Maplewood, the community remained steadfast in its support. Fundraisers were organized to create scholarships in James's name, aimed at helping minority students pursue careers in public service. Murals honoring victims of police brutality appeared on walls throughout the town, serving as powerful reminders of the work still needed. And perhaps most significantly, dialogue opened up between residents and local law enforcement, fostering understanding and cooperation. Though the journey ahead promised to be long and difficult, James refused to give up. He understood that true change required persistence, patience, and unity. As he stood before a crowd of supporters at a rally one evening, microphone in hand, he delivered a message that resonated deeply. "We are stronger together. Together, we can build a future where everyone feels safe, respected, and valued." The cheers that followed echoed through the night, a testament to the power of collective action and unwavering resolve. The weeks leading up to the trial were a whirlwind of activity for James Thompson. With each passing day, the case against Officer Daniel Carter gained more traction, drawing national attention and intensifying public scrutiny. Journalists flocked to Maplewood, setting up camp outside the courthouse where pretrial hearings were held. Protesters gathered daily, holding signs that read, "Justice over bias" and "Reform now." For James, the pressure was immense. He knew this wasn't just about him anymore. It was about sending a message to communities everywhere that racial profiling and police misconduct would no longer be tolerated. James's legal team worked tirelessly to build a strong case. They pored over every piece of evidence, from the body cam footage to witness statements, ensuring nothing was overlooked. Their strategy centered on exposing not only Carter's actions, but also the systemic failures within the police department that allowed such behavior to persist. The lawsuit accused Carter of violating James's constitutional rights and sought damages for emotional distress, as well as punitive measures to deter future incidents. Meanwhile, prosecutors pursued criminal charges against Carter, including assault and abuse of power. As preparations intensified, James found himself reliving the incident repeatedly, on the stand during mock trials, in interviews with investigators, and even in his dreams. Each retelling brought back the fear and anger he had felt that day. Yet he remained steadfast, driven by the knowledge that his fight could pave the way for meaningful change. Lisa stayed by his side through it all, offering unwavering support. She attended every meeting, reviewed documents, and helped shield James from the overwhelming media attention. Together they leaned on their faith in each other, finding strength in unity. Officer Carter, on the other hand, faced an entirely different reality. Once revered as a figure of authority, he now became a pariah. His suspension turned into termination after internal investigations confirmed multiple prior complaints against him. Former colleagues distanced themselves, unwilling to risk association with someone labeled a bad cop. Even his family abandoned him. His wife finalized their divorce, citing irreconcilable differences, while his children refused to speak to him. Alone and disgraced, Carter retreated further into isolation, haunted by the consequences of his actions. The courtroom atmosphere on the first day of the trial was electric. Supporters packed the gallery, many wearing shirts emblazoned with "Trucker Justice for James." Reporters jostled for seats, eager to capture every detail of what promised to be a landmark case. Lawyers delivered opening statements, painting starkly contrasting pictures of the events. James's attorney emphasized the lack of justification for Carter's use of force, pointing out the discrepancies between his claims and the video evidence. The prosecution echoed these arguments, framing Carter's behavior as emblematic of deeper systemic issues. In contrast, Carter's defense team argued that he acted under perceived threat and followed standard protocol, attempting to shift blame onto vague descriptions provided by dispatch. Witness testimonies added depth to the narrative unfolding before the jury. Neighbors who had witnessed the incident recounted how calm and cooperative James had been, directly contradicting Carter's account. Experts testified about implicit bias in policing, highlighting patterns of racial profiling that mirrored Carter's actions. One particularly compelling witness was a former colleague of Carter's, who described instances of aggressive behavior and discriminatory remarks made by the officer in the past. These revelations painted a damning portrait of Carter, leaving little room for doubt about his motivations. Throughout the proceedings, James sat quietly beside his lawyer, listening intently. Though visibly uncomfortable at times, he maintained composure, aware that his presence alone carried weight. Outside the courtroom, supporters rallied, chanting slogans and holding vigils. Their voices served as a constant reminder of the broader implications of the trial, not just for James but for countless others seeking justice. Meanwhile, Carter appeared increasingly agitated on the stand. Under cross-examination, inconsistencies in his story emerged, undermining his credibility. When asked why he failed to verify James's identity before escalating the situation, Carter stumbled over his words, unable to provide a satisfactory explanation. The prosecutor seized on these moments, driving home the point that Carter's actions stemmed from prejudice rather than legitimate concern for safety. As the trial progressed, public sentiment shifted decisively in James's favor. Social media buzzed with updates, hashtags, and calls for reform. Influential figures weighed in, amplifying the conversation about accountability in law enforcement. Town halls across the country adopted resolutions condemning racial profiling and advocating for policy changes. Schools incorporated discussions of the case into curricula, encouraging students to think critically about justice and equality. Back in Maplewood, the community rallied around James in unprecedented ways. Fundraisers continued to pour in resources, funding everything from legal fees to outreach programs aimed at educating youth about civil rights. Local businesses displayed banners supporting James, turning the town into a symbol of resistance against systemic racism. Even city officials joined the movement, pledging to implement reforms recommended by advocacy groups. Despite the mounting evidence against him, Carter clung to hope that the jury might sympathize with his position as a law enforcement officer. His defense team doubled down on arguments about split-second decision-making and the challenges officers face in high-pressure situations. However, these attempts fell flat when confronted with the undeniable truth. Carter had targeted James, based solely on his race, disregarding basic principles of fairness and humanity. By the time closing arguments arrived, emotions ran high. James's attorney delivered a powerful summation, urging the jury to consider not only the facts of the case, but also its wider significance. "This isn't just about one man or one moment," he declared. "It's about whether we choose to tolerate injustice or demand better for everyone." The prosecution echoed this sentiment, emphasizing the need for accountability and transparency in policing. When the jury finally retired to deliberate, anticipation gripped the courtroom. Hours stretched into days as people waited anxiously for a verdict. During this time, James reflected on the journey thus far. Though exhausted, he felt grateful for the support he had received and hopeful for the future. Whatever the outcome, he knew the fight for justice wouldn't end here. This trial was merely the beginning, a catalyst for change that extended far beyond Maplewood. Finally, after 3 tense days, the jury returned with their decision. As the forepersons stood to announce the verdict, silence filled the room. All eyes turned to James, who sat upright, hands clasped tightly together. When the word guilty rang out, a wave of relief washed over him. Cheers erupted outside the courthouse as news spread quickly. Supporters hugged one another, tears streaming down their faces. For James, it was a bittersweet victory, a vindication of his innocence, but also a sobering reminder of the work still ahead. Carter, visibly defeated, was taken into custody immediately. Sentencing would come later, but the damage to his reputation was irreversible. Stripped of his badge and livelihood, he faced years behind bars, a fate that underscored the gravity of his actions. For James, the ruling represented more than personal triumph. It symbolized a step toward dismantling the structures of oppression that plagued society. In the aftermath of the trial, James threw himself into advocacy work with renewed vigor. He traveled across the country, sharing his story and inspiring others to join the fight for reform. His efforts yielded tangible results, including new legislation mandating anti-bias training for law enforcement officers and increased funding for community policing initiatives. Slowly but surely, progress took root. Maplewood itself transformed in profound ways. Residents embraced a spirit of inclusivity, working together to create safer, more equitable spaces. Memorials honoring victims of police brutality sprang up throughout the town, serving as reminders of the resilience required to forge a better future. And though scars lingered, both personal and societal, healing began to take hold. For James, the road ahead remained challenging, yet he walked it with purpose. Every speech, every meeting, every protest reinforced his belief in the power of collective action. He often thought back to the day Officer Carter pointed a gun at him, remembering the fear and anger that had consumed him. But he also remembered the courage it took to stand firm, to refuse to let hatred win. In doing so, he proved that even in darkness, light can emerge if people refuse to stay silent. The verdict against Officer Daniel Carter sent shockwaves through Maplewood and beyond, marking a pivotal moment in the fight for justice and accountability. As news of the guilty verdict spread, celebrations erupted in the streets, with cheers and applause echoing through neighborhoods. For many, it wasn't just a victory for James Thompson. It was a triumph for marginalized communities everywhere, who had long endured systemic racism and abuse of power. But while the ruling brought relief to some, it also underscored the deep-rooted issues within law enforcement that remained unresolved. The journey toward meaningful reform was far from over. In the days following the trial, James found himself at the center of a growing movement. Invitations poured in from organizations, universities, and advocacy groups eager to hear his story. He traveled extensively, delivering speeches that resonated deeply with audiences. His message was simple yet powerful. Change begins when we refuse to accept injustice as normal. At each event, he shared not only his experience but also practical steps people could take to combat racial profiling and demand transparency in policing. These talks inspired countless individuals to get involved, whether by volunteering, donating, or simply starting conversations about race and equality. James's advocacy extended beyond public speaking. He collaborated with lawmakers to draft legislation aimed at addressing systemic issues within law enforcement. One key proposal focused on implementing mandatory anti-bias training programs for all officers, emphasizing empathy, cultural sensitivity, and de-escalation techniques. Another initiative sought to establish independent oversight boards to investigate complaints of misconduct, ensuring accountability without interference from internal biases. Though progress was slow, these efforts gained traction, earning support from both sides of the political spectrum. Meanwhile, Officer Carter faced the full weight of his actions. Sentenced to 5 years in prison, he entered the penal system stripped of his former authority and privileges. Life behind bars proved harsh, especially for someone accustomed to wielding power. Fellow inmates often taunted him, calling him a disgrace to law enforcement. Guards treated him with disdain, viewing his crimes as a betrayal of their profession. Isolated and broken, Carter spent most of his time reflecting on the choices that led him here. He wrote letters to his children, apologizing for abandoning them and begging for forgiveness. Yet no matter how sincere his remorse, the damage done to his family and to James could never be undone. Back in Maplewood, the community continued to heal and rebuild. Residents took pride in their role in holding Officer Carter accountable, seeing it as proof that collective action could drive change. Local leaders seized the opportunity to implement reforms, hosting workshops and town halls to educate citizens about civil rights and police-community relations. Schools introduced curricula focusing on social justice, encouraging students to think critically about fairness and equality. Even the police department underwent significant restructuring, adopting new policies designed to foster trust and collaboration with residents. For James, however, the emotional scars lingered. Though he had achieved justice, the memory of being targeted because of his race haunted him. Nightmares plagued his sleep, and moments of anxiety struck unexpectedly during routine activities like grocery shopping or taking Max for a walk. Lisa noticed these struggles and encouraged him to seek therapy. Reluctant at first, James eventually agreed, recognizing that healing required more than external victories. Through counseling, he learned coping strategies and began processing the trauma he had endured. Slowly, he regained a sense of peace, finding solace in the knowledge that his ordeal had sparked positive change. As months turned into years, the impact of James's case became undeniable. Across the nation, cities examined their own policing practices, implementing measures inspired by the reforms championed in Maplewood. Activists cited his story as an example of resilience and determination, using it to galvanize support for broader movements like Black Lives Matter. Social media campaigns highlighted his achievements, inspiring others to share their stories and push for accountability in their own communities. James also played a crucial role in mentoring young activists. He mentored teenagers passionate about creating change, teaching them how to organize protests, engage with policymakers, and amplify their voices effectively. Many credited him with helping them find courage and purpose. One such mentee, a high school senior named Marcus, went on to lead a successful campaign to install body cameras in his city's police force. When asked about his inspiration, Marcus replied, "It's James. He showed me that even when the odds are stacked against you, standing up matters." Despite his successes, James remained humble. He understood that true transformation required patience and persistence. Speaking at a national conference on criminal justice reform, he reminded attendees that victories like his were rare and hard-won. "We must celebrate these moments," he said, "but we cannot rest until every person feels safe in their own skin. Until then, our work is not finished." Officer Carter's name faded from headlines, replaced by discussions of policy changes and grassroots initiatives. Released early for good behavior after serving 3 years, he returned to society a changed man, or so he claimed. Unable to find employment due to his conviction, he struggled financially, relying on odd jobs to make ends meet. His attempts to reconnect with his children met with mixed results. While his son harbored resentment, his daughter cautiously welcomed him back into her life. Though he expressed regret for his actions, few forgave him, and fewer still trusted him. Years later, Maplewood stood as a testament to what perseverance and unity could achieve. Community policing initiatives thrived, fostering mutual respect between residents and officers. Memorials honoring victims of police brutality dotted public spaces, serving as reminders of the ongoing struggle for justice. And James, he remained a pillar of strength, continuing to advocate for equity and fairness. Now in his late 50s, he reflected on his journey with a mix of pride and humility. "I never imagined I'd become a symbol of anything," James once told a reporter during an interview. "But if sharing my story helps someone else feel less alone or inspires them to speak out, then it's worth it. We're all connected, and together, we can create a world where everyone belongs." His words echoed far beyond Maplewood, reaching hearts and minds across the globe. What started as a single act of injustice had ignited a movement, one that refused to let hatred define humanity. Through it all, James held on to one truth. Even in darkness, light can emerge if people refuse to stay silent. And those scars lingered, both personal and societal. Healing slowly took root, nourished by hope, courage, and the relentless pursuit of justice. Years after the trial that shook Maplewood, the ripple effects of James Thompson's case continued to shape communities far beyond the small suburban town. The guilty verdict against Officer Daniel Carter had not only brought justice for James, but also ignited a nationwide conversation about systemic racism, police accountability, and the urgent need for reform. What began as an isolated incident evolved into a movement, a beacon of hope for those who had long felt powerless in the face of injustice. James's role in this transformation was undeniable. His courage and determination inspired countless individuals to stand up and demand change. From grassroots activists to seasoned policymakers, people looked to him as a symbol of resilience and moral clarity. Yet despite his growing influence, James remained grounded. He often reminded himself and others that he was just one person doing what he believed was right. "This isn't about me," he would say during interviews or speeches. "It's about all of us working together to create a better future." In the years following the trial, James dedicated himself fully to advocacy work. He founded an organization called Pathways to Justice, aimed at addressing racial profiling and promoting equitable policing practices. The initiative provided resources for victims of police misconduct, offered training programs for law enforcement agencies, and collaborated with schools to educate young people about civil rights. Through Pathways to Justice, James traveled extensively, meeting with community leaders, speaking at conferences, and participating in panel discussions. His message resonated deeply, particularly among marginalized groups who saw their struggles reflected in his story. One of the most significant achievements of Pathways to Justice was its success in pushing for legislative reforms. Working closely with lawmakers, James helped draft bills that mandated comprehensive anti-bias training for officers, established independent oversight boards to investigate misconduct, and required transparency in disciplinary actions. Several states adopted these measures, setting new standards for accountability in law enforcement. The impact was profound. Departments that implemented these policies reported improved relations with minority communities and a noticeable decline in complaints of racial profiling. Maplewood itself became a model for other towns and cities, striving to build trust between residents and police. Under the leadership of newly appointed Chief of Police Maria Rodriguez, the department underwent a dramatic overhaul. Officers participated in monthly workshops focused on cultural sensitivity, conflict resolution, and mental health awareness. Body cameras were made mandatory, and footage was regularly reviewed by civilian review boards to ensure compliance with protocols. Community outreach programs flourished, bringing officers and residents together for events like neighborhood cleanups, youth mentorship initiatives, and open dialogues about safety concerns. For many in Maplewood, these changes represented more than policy shifts. They signaled a cultural shift. Residents no longer viewed the police as adversaries, but as partners in creating a safer, more inclusive environment. At annual festivals and block parties, it wasn't uncommon to see officers mingling with families, laughing and sharing stories. Trust once shattered slowly rebuilt brick by brick. Despite the progress, challenges persisted. Not everyone embraced the reforms enthusiastically. Some officers resisted the new policies, grumbling about political correctness or claiming they hindered their ability to do their jobs effectively. A handful even resigned, accusing the department of prioritizing public relations over actual law enforcement. These dissenting voices served as reminders that change rarely came without resistance. But under Chief Rodriguez's firm leadership, the department stayed committed to its mission, weeding out bad actors and fostering a culture of accountability. Officer Carter, now released from prison, struggled to reintegrate into society. Haunted by guilt and ostracized by former colleagues, he found it nearly impossible to rebuild his life. Jobs were scarce. Employers balked at hiring someone with a felony conviction related to police misconduct. His attempts to explain himself fell flat, met with skepticism or outright hostility. Even his children, though somewhat reconciled, kept their distance, wary of trusting him again. Carter spent most of his days alone, reflecting on the choices that led him here. In quiet moments, he wondered if redemption was possible, or if he would forever be defined by his mistakes. Back in Maplewood, James faced his own challenges. Though celebrated as a hero, he sometimes felt overwhelmed by the weight of expectations. People constantly sought his advice, asked him to speak at events, or looked to him for solutions to complex problems. While flattered, James knew he couldn't solve everything. There were nights when exhaustion crept in, leaving him questioning whether he was making enough of a difference. Lisa noticed these moments and gently reminded him to take breaks, assuring him that his efforts mattered, even if progress seemed slow. To cope, James leaned on his support system: Lisa, his children, close friends, and fellow advocates. They reminded him that he didn't have to carry the burden alone. Together, they brainstormed strategies, shared responsibilities, and celebrated small victories along the way. Whether it was passing a local ordinance or convincing a school district to adopt anti-bias curricula, every step forward felt like a triumph worth acknowledging. As time passed, James's story took on a life of its own. Documentaries, books, and podcasts chronicled his journey, amplifying his message to global audiences. Schools incorporated his case into lessons about civics and social justice, using it as a real-world example of how individual actions could spark systemic change. One documentary titled Standing Tall: The James Thompson Story won critical acclaim for its portrayal of resilience and unity. During the film's premiere, James sat quietly in the audience, humbled by the outpouring of gratitude from viewers. The movement James inspired extended beyond policing reform. It intersected with broader efforts to address inequality in education, healthcare, housing, and employment. Activists drew parallels between racial profiling by police and discriminatory practices in other institutions, calling for holistic approaches to dismantling systemic racism. James embraced this intersectionality, collaborating with organizations tackling issues like affordable housing and voter suppression. By expanding his focus, he hoped to create lasting change across multiple fronts. Though proud of what he had accomplished, James never lost sight of the bigger picture. He understood that true equality required sustained effort that spanned generations. Speaking at a national summit on racial justice, he urged attendees to remain vigilant. "We've come a long way," he said, "but there's still so much work to be done. Don't let complacency creep in. Keep pushing, keep fighting, and above all, keep believing in the power of unity." His words resonated deeply, echoing through packed auditoriums and online forums alike. For many, they served as a rallying cry, a reminder that while victories, like James's case, were milestones, they were not endpoints. The fight for justice was ongoing, requiring constant vigilance and unwavering commitment. By the 10th anniversary of the trial, Maplewood stood transformed. Once divided by fear and mistrust, the community now thrived on collaboration and mutual respect. Memorials honoring victims of police brutality had become gathering places for reflection and action. Schools boasted diverse curricula that celebrated inclusivity and equity, and the police department, once synonymous with controversy, earned praise for its progressive approach to community policing. James, now in his early 60s, reflected on the journey with a mix of pride and humility. Though retired from active advocacy work, he remained a guiding presence, offering wisdom and encouragement to younger generations. His legacy lived on, not just in the policies and programs he helped create, but in the countless lives he touched. Through it all, James held on to one truth: even in darkness, light can emerge if people refuse to stay silent. And though scars lingered, both personal and societal, healing slowly took root, nourished by hope, courage, and the relentless pursuit of justice. By the time James Thompson reached his late 60s, his story had become a cornerstone of modern civil rights history. The ripple effects of his fight against Officer Daniel Carter's misconduct continued to shape not only Maplewood, but also communities across the nation and even internationally. What began as a single act of injustice evolved into a movement that refused to let hatred define humanity. It was a testament to the power of resilience, unity, and unwavering determination. James's advocacy work remained deeply influential, though he had stepped back from the front lines in recent years. His organization, Pathways to Justice, thrived. Under new leadership, a team of passionate young activists who carried forward his vision with fresh energy and innovative ideas. They expanded its reach, partnering with global organizations to address systemic racism and police accountability. worldwide. From South Africa to Brazil, countries grappling with similar issues looked to James's case as a blueprint for change. Documentaries, books, and educational programs based on his journey inspired countless individuals to take action in their own communities. In Maplewood, the transformation was nothing short of remarkable. The town had become a model for equitable policing and community engagement. Residents no longer feared interactions with law enforcement. Instead, they welcomed officers as allies in creating a safer environment. Annual festivals celebrated diversity, featuring speeches, art exhibits, and performances, highlighting the importance of inclusivity. Schools incorporated lessons about social justice into their curricula, ensuring future generations understood the value of equality and fairness. Even businesses joined the effort, pledging to support minority-owned enterprises and promote workplace equity. The police department underwent further improvements, solidifying its reputation as one of the most progressive in the country. Under Chief Maria Rodriguez's leadership, officers embraced transparency and accountability. Body camera footage was routinely reviewed by civilian oversight boards, which included representatives from diverse backgrounds. Regular town hall meetings provided residents with opportunities to voice concerns and offer feedback. Officers participated in ongoing training sessions focused on cultural sensitivity, de-escalation techniques, and mental health awareness. These initiatives fostered trust and strengthened relationships between the force and the community. For many residents, these changes represented more than policy shifts. They signaled a cultural shift. People felt empowered to speak up when they witnessed injustice, knowing their voices would be heard. Young people, inspired by James's example, organized protests, launched campaigns, and created platforms to amplify marginalized voices. One such initiative, led by high school students, successfully petitioned local officials to rename streets after civil rights leaders. Another group established a scholarship fund for minority students pursuing careers in public service. Maplewood became a living embodiment of collective action and progress. Officer Carter, now in his mid-50s, lived a quiet, solitary life far removed from the spotlight. After serving 3 years in prison, he struggled to rebuild his identity. Jobs were scarce, and those willing to hire him often exploited his desperation, offering low wages and poor conditions. He worked odd jobs, janitorial work, warehouse, shifts, anything to make ends meet. His children, now adults, maintained limited contact. While his daughter occasionally visited, she set firm boundaries, reminding him of the harm he had caused. His son, however, remained distant, unable to forgive or forget. Carter spent much of his time reflecting on his actions. In moments of solitude, he wrote letters to James, though he never sent them. "I'm sorry," one draft read. "I wish I could undo what I did, but I know that's impossible. All I can do is try to be better." These words echoed in his mind, a constant reminder of the choices that defined him. Though redemption seemed out of reach, he clung to small acts of kindness, helping neighbors carry groceries, volunteering at food banks, hoping to leave some positive mark on the world. Meanwhile, James enjoyed a quieter life, surrounded by loved ones and cherished memories. Lisa remained his rock, supporting him through every step of their journey together. Their children, now grown, often brought their own families to visit, filling the house with laughter and warmth. Grandchildren adored James, listening intently as he shared stories of his military service and advocacy work. To them, he wasn't just a grandfather, he was a hero who taught them the importance of standing up for what was right. Though retired from active advocacy, James stayed connected to the movement. He mentored young activists, offering guidance and encouragement over Zoom calls and coffee meetings. Many credited him with helping them find their footing in the fight for justice. "He taught me how to channel anger into action," said one mentee, a college student leading a campaign to end cash bail. "Without him, I wouldn't have found my voice." James also reflected on the broader impact of his case. Social media campaigns inspired by Dar Justice for James had sparked conversations about racial profiling and police reform globally. Cities implemented policies modeled after Maplewood's reforms, reporting improved relations between law enforcement and minority communities. Activists cited his story as proof that individual courage could drive systemic change. Even international organizations referenced his case in reports advocating for human rights and equality. On the 10th anniversary of the trial, Maplewood hosted a commemorative event celebrating the progress made since that fateful day. Hundreds gathered in the park where James had been targeted, now renamed Thompson Unity Park. A mural depicting his face alongside symbols of justice and hope adorned a nearby wall. Speeches from local leaders, activists, and James himself highlighted the importance of perseverance and collaboration. As James addressed the crowd, his voice steady and heartfelt, he reminded everyone that the fight was far from over. "This isn't just my victory. It's ours," he said, gesturing to the sea of faces before him. "We've come so far, but there's still work to be done. Let's keep pushing, keep fighting, and keep believing in the power of unity. Together, we can create a world where everyone feels safe, respected, and valued." His words resonated deeply, drawing applause and tears alike. Attendees left the event feeling inspired, carrying with them a renewed sense of purpose. For many, it was a moment of reflection, a chance to honor the past while looking toward the future. As the sun set over Maplewood, casting long shadows, across the park, James stood quietly, watching families laugh and children play. Max, now elderly but still loyal, rested at his feet. James placed a hand on the dog's head, smiling softly. Despite the scars, both personal and societal, healing had taken root. Hope blossomed in its place, nourished by the relentless pursuit of justice. And so James held on to one truth. Even in darkness, light can emerge if people refuse to stay silent. Through courage, compassion, and collective action, they had proven that change was possible. The road ahead promised challenges, but James knew the journey would continue, as long as there were hearts willing to fight for a better tomorrow.